Hey, Emily.
Hey, Stephanie.
You want to do a podcast?
Absolutely.
Welcome to Cycle Chats, a podcast to destigmatize what it means to be a woman. This is episode 19, Mom Brain, where we talk to an expert on all things mom. She is a therapist who helps you navigate what being a mom looks like for you and the tips and tricks to help you along the way. So let's welcome to the podcast, Bryce.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Oh, it is completely our pleasure. I am so intrigued by what you do. The first question I always ask is, what made you get into this field?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor. Looking back, I think I was always kind of like destined for this path. I remember being like a little kid and like having these conversations with my friends about disagreements we've had. And looking back, I'm like, wow, that probably wasn't like the most normal thing to be doing when I was like 8 years old, wanting to like solve problems and, improve relationships. But I think overall, I've just been super curious about like humans' work. And, that includes myself, right? And over the years, I've really kind of delved into so many different types of communities in terms of my work. I've worked in the juvenile justice field for a while. I worked in addiction and recovery, trauma, and more recently, I've come into maternal mental health in the last 7 years. And since I became a mom myself, and that's mostly just due to my own rocky start in motherhood. I went through infertility and miscarriage and postpartum depression and anxiety. And through all of that, I wanted to kind of just get into the field of working with mothers more. Previously, I'd worked with children, primarily. And it was this shift for me in wanting to be more supportive of the mothers and the parents that were with these children, with these families, and how I could, support them through this process.
I love that. I love that you were a communicator from a young age. That was definitely me. And I can probably speak for Stephanie as well. Steph and I are both actors, and that's basically what we do. We communicate all the time. So I love that that's kind of the shining light that led you to be a certified therapist. That's amazing, because then you just get to talk to people for a living.
Yeah, you know what? And I was a super shy kid too, which is and I'm like definitely an introverted adult as well, that is not like super outgoing and like all of that. But I love those real like deep conversations. And I did as a kid too. Like I was not just like, that surface level stuff. Like I get right into it, So I think it's amazing how we can all know ourselves so well from such an early age, just like you two, right?
Oh, yeah. I used to drink coffee with the adults. And while all the kids were like playing and I don't know, picking their nose and feeding it to each other, I was like, I would like a little cream in my coffee, please. And they're like, how old are you? Why are you sitting here with us?
I love it. How was your week? Let's talk. Right?
How's work? They're like, you're 6.
Stephanie pulls out like a flask that's in her pocket and like pours some like Kahlua in her coffee at a young age. Like, it's been a tough week for me, guys.
Nothing has changed, let me tell you.
So, Bryce, I always commend the women that start down a certain path and then kind of through their lives and through what happens to them, weave in and out and kind of pick different things, because I think that's really strong. It's like asking for help. It's really a skill. So I commend you for being like, you know what, I went through this, so I want to help other women go through this so I can hopefully make it easier for them. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And that's what all of us should be trying to do. I went through this, so how can I help you?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of power in kind of giving yourself freedom to change your mind, right? That there doesn't have to be this like path that you start down and you have to continue down forever and ever and ever just because that's what you did yesterday. I think that I've always tried to remind myself of that. And I think my parents were a good example of that, of like shifting gears and changing directions in terms of their careers and their, just various other things. So I've always tried and like keep myself mindful of that, like, is this still like firing me up and lighting me up? If so, continue on, right? And if not, like, what is going to fire me up? What am I interested in? What do I feel like is going to be the best use of my time, and really following that drive, right?
Yes, I am snapping my fingers over here.
Yeah, I am saying, get out of my brain. I think the biggest thing for me was always if I didn't stay on a certain path, I felt like I had failed somehow, but that's not even the case. because it takes a real intense amount of self-awareness to say exactly what you said, Bryce. Does this fire me up? And if not, well, what is going to fire me up? So I think that's a really important question to check in with yourself to say, am I feeling, you're not going to feel 100% all the time, but if you are more times than not saying, this isn't tickling my fancy, well, then you better find a bigger feather because it's got to.
Bryce, I'm sure you have a lot of moms, right, that come to you, and sure they're all dealing with very similar hardships, especially if they're first time moms. So what do you find is the hardest thing that your clients come to you dealing with?
I think overall, even when I was working with families and, parents and everything, I think that the biggest thing I hear from moms, or I can, gather from moms, even from what they tell me, is just figuring out where they fit in the list of priorities within the family, right? We've all had so much influence in our lives up until the time we become mothers that bring up a lot of feelings about how much we do or don't deserve to prioritize ourselves and our needs, right? And whether that's what we saw in childhood from our own, mother or primary caregiver, or what messages we even receive from friends or even TV shows. So it can be hard for us to break out of those molds and, those rules that we can be led down and led to believe and play out in our own motherhood experiences. And I think that's where a lot of, that kind of mom martyr type stuff comes up, is that we've been, I don't want to say led to believe that we should feel guilt for taking care of ourselves, but there is kind of the overwhelming or overarching kind of message that our kids have to always be our first priority, or, we always have to come last, that sort of thing. And it can be a really tough thing to break down for ourselves and figure out where we do fit.
Yes. And not even for moms. I think that's just women in general. So the stress of, right, adding the mom factor into it only adds to that stress and that guilt that women feel. And I don't know where it comes from. Steph and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. This guilt is just kind of seeded into, as I was kind of talking about before, right, where it's kind of sewn into your skin. It's just kind of in our blood. We have this thing that in our brain maybe that makes us feel more guilty than we should about certain things.
We've been socialized to believe so much about ourselves, right? That, a clean house means we're doing a good job, or looking like we didn't have a baby after we have a baby is a good thing, right? You said the snapback that we hear about all the time, that there are so many ways that, as like you said, as women and even more so when we become mothers, that we're fulfilling these roles that we don't even know where they came from, but we're playing them out again and again, generation to generation. And it's hard to break through all of that.
Yeah, well, you get stuck on the conveyor belt, and it's sometimes really hard to stop it. And that goes back to self-awareness, like Steph was saying before. It's the self-awareness game.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. And I think kind of being open to exploring ourselves, which is a big part of therapy, of course, and the work I do, is having a willingness, because it's not easy to have self-awareness, right? It requires us to look at stuff. It requires us to look at our behaviors and our beliefs and what we're doing, and it requires us to be real conscious in our present, right? Which isn't always super comfortable, depending on a variety of factors, whether we have some trauma history or anything like that. And to kind of really sit with that self-awareness is a skill, and it takes some time to be able to do that, right?
Definitely. Yes. I mean, like I said before, Steph and I are not moms, but I definitely still feel the sometimes unawareness of where I kind of fit. Do I put myself first, or is it my husband at some points? And I think it ebbs and flows. It can't always just be one way. Sometimes he needs me, and of course I'm gonna, you're there for them. That's a good partnership. That's good communicating. But I think it's really interesting that, especially in this age of social media, we have so much self-care, so much self-love. All of this stuff is being promoted, and it needs to be a disclaimer at the bottom, this is hard work. This doesn't happen easily.
Exactly. And I think the disclaimer should also say, this is not your cure-all to be instantly better. This is a lifelong journey. And I think for anybody that feels along the lines of that feeling of being a mom, that's being a caretaker, pouring your heart and your soul and putting people first. So I think that's just typically a woman thing. And you see that a lot in the animal kingdom too. The females most of the time are the caretakers. And sometimes they'll take care of others in the pride, so to speak, that aren't even their own. the other cubs, the other babies. And I know in elephants, the baby's abandoned or the mom dies. The other mothers come in and raise that little one as their own. So I think it's just naturally built into us as females to want to give because it makes us feel good. Then we forget we have to give to ourselves, or that giving is going to start becoming very draining.
There's so much to that, right? We were at the park last night with my kids and there was a few other families there, but you're always watching all the kids. It's so funny. I have 2 kids, but you're also saying like, oh, like there's Noah going down the slide and like he's going to crash into so-and-so. So like you said, that there is that kind of natural inclination towards caregiving, that we're all always kind of, there is this way of just keeping our eyes open to all of the possibilities, right?
So for these women that are coming to you, Bryce, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can give these women that are moms and also women that are not moms?
I talk a lot, in my clinical work, we always talked a lot about being mindful of almost like scheduling stuff in, it's so easy to, leave stuff up to chance as women and as mothers and being like, oh, I'll take care of that when I have time, or I'll take care of that when, the opportunity presents itself. But we don't always get there, we don't always get to it because other stuff always comes up on our radar that we prioritize over ourselves, over our own needs. That's just the way it kind of happens. But when we can like start our days and our weeks and identify specific actions and times that we and our families, or, even if you are, just a part of a partnership or even like a single person, being able to identify when you're going to meet your needs, how you're going to be mindful and intentional about doing so can be a big piece of the puzzle, I think, of allowing ourselves to be a priority. And I especially do that a lot when I work with families because I think it helps everyone in the family to recognize the mother, who's often the primary caretaker, have their needs be a focus as well. Because so often it can be like, well, your needs always come last. Like whether it's said out loud or not, it's kind of a belief, right? Like everyone else should come first. But having the whole family come on board and recognize that there needs to be time for mom or time for, this primary caregiver to have their needs met and to be able to kind of recharge, right? So I always go back to that, really being intentional about planning, being intentional about identifying what fills you up and what drains you, and figuring out how to make that all happen.
That is the key. Steph said it in an episode recently where it's not the idea that the mom is going to go away forever. It's just like, hey, I need 5 minutes in the shower to cry it out or do whatever I need. I just need the 5 minutes. I'll be right back. I'm not going away forever. I just need a pause.
Yeah. And that is like the biggest piece, right? I think we're so often led to believe that, self-care needs to be this 3-day girls weekend, or it needs to be, going to the spa for the day on Saturday. And those are awesome, wonderful things, right? But in certain seasons of life, like that's not always possible. And sometimes self-care looks more like taking, 15 minutes to go make sure you take your shower every few days, or taking a walk after dinner, having your family know that this is what's going to happen. Wednesday night, I'm taking a walk after dinner, everyone by myself, listening to a podcast, right? And, I just identifying those opportunities just to get those little bits of time in sometimes can make such a huge difference when we're kind of going all out on that caregiving treadmill.
I like that you mentioned about planning and scheduling time. I find that grounds me when I force myself into, and not forces, I feel like that's an aggressive word, but I try to keep myself diligent in my walks, my lunch walks at work, because I sit at a desk job for like 40 hours plus sometimes a week, and you got to get up. Sometimes I can't be staring at the screen. So I'm very diligent on saying, this is my time away from my phone to sit. And even if it's just 10 minutes, I can't do the full 30-minute walk. What a difference that makes in bringing you back to the core of you. So I think it's important that, in especially the world we live in today, where there really is not a lot of time, it feels sometimes, to make time. And even if it's just 15 minutes, it's true. 15 minutes changes the rest of your 6 hours. It shifts your perspective.
It totally does. And I think it can give you, even on both sides, it's so easy to focus on what happens after that 15 minutes. It can kind of give you the energy and the, motivation to keep going. But also when we plan it, we know that it's coming. So you can't undervalue kind of the benefit of knowing that in 3 hours, I'm going to get to go outside and feel the wind on my face and feel the sun and to move my body in a way that feels like good, right? That there is on both sides of it, when we schedule it, there are benefits that boost us up and give us a lot of those feel-good chemicals in our brains that we wouldn't have if we just left it up to chance. Because often when we leave it up to chance, we're kind of like frazzled by that point. We're like, I have to get out of the house. Like, I have to go now. And so we're kind of like built up this kind of angst and pressure, and that we're kind of going to release, as opposed to knowing when it's scheduled, we know that we're having this like, I don't want to say break, but we have this kind of opportunity to recharge coming. And then we get the benefits on the back end as well.
I am curious to know your thoughts on social media and parenting, because as a teacher, I'm sure Emily can attest to this, I found so many times kids who were, maybe craving a little bit more affection would kind of get an iPad put in front of them. And I do understand the benefit of that for the parent, but what is your take on how social media is being used alongside being a mom, being a parent?
I think this is such a good question, because I think about it actually all the time as a person on social media, right? In the kind of the parenting realm. I think it can be such a double-edged sword, in all honesty. I mean, I think part of the reason I came to social media was to make mental health and parenting and motherhood stuff more kind of relatable and accessible, and kind of bring it out from the behind the closed doors of, maybe the therapy room or something like that. And I think there is a lot of positive in that, right? And I can see all the good that comes from that. But I also think there can be a lot of comparison that comes from that I think is harmful in some ways, or at least not super positive for parents and for mothers, and that's kind of in two ways. I think, first of all, in seeing like the blogger influencer type stuff, right? I mean, I think that it's so easy to look at, say, Instagram, which is like where you kind of am the most. You see these perfect parenthoods. You have, these super kids that are, playing by themselves and have these beautiful clothes on. They have their clean houses and these great relationships, and they're going on these awesome trips. And it's so easy to believe that that's like reality or something we should be aspiring to, and getting caught up in that, and going down that kind of road of wondering like, what's real, what's not real, is like, what's wrong with me? When we start going into that comparison trap of thinking, my life doesn't look like that. Like if someone was in my house right now, they'd see like a disaster, or, they'd hear my kids like having a meltdown or something like that. So it can be, I think in that regard, it can be not so great, that we're kind of, I think there are some kind of unrealistic ideals that we're trying to live up to in terms of like comparison. But I also think, in terms of there can be information overload too, from a expert perspective, right? That there are so many experts on social media now that we're like inundated with information on how things should, quote unquote, should be done, right, as parents. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on people to think that there's actually a right way to parent, or there's a right way to do this whole motherhood thing. And that's just not true. So I think those are the downsides, kind of that comparison, but also the information overload aspect of so many experts, so many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
I know social media is just, that comparison game is so dangerous. And we're all smart enough to know that what we're looking at is the best parts of somebody's life. So that's why I think it's not that it's like radical when people show off the realness, but it's finally just a breath of fresh air to be like, yeah, I don't need to see all of your dirty laundry, but let me see a couple clothes on the floor. I'm in. Makes me feel more normal. Like, oh, okay, you're going through it too. Awesome. I'm not alone.
You're a real human, it's like hilarious, that there is, like you said, we know it's not real. We know it's a highlight reel. We know that there is like, and there's a performative aspect of it because people are making money off of it. So it has to look a certain way. But there is bringing our mindset into recognizing it and being in a place that we're able to notice those differences, as opposed to get stuck in that comparison wheel. And I think sometimes when we're using social media to kind of like zone out, we're already not feeling super great about our lives maybe, or we're having a rough day, and it can be so much easier to get stuck in that comparison game.
Yeah. And for new moms, I'm sure that's just, you're scrolling through for, the 15 to an hour that you have when a baby is napping, you're trying to do laundry, whatever you're trying to do is, this first time, second time mom. And like you said, you're just comparing. You're like, wow, she's able to have a cup of coffee outside. How? I don't understand. Like, even just those tiny things become these huge molehills because it becomes really difficult. Our parents come from a generation where social media really didn't exist as they were growing up. So their parenting values, what they taught to us is different. And social media kind of came into play, I think, when I was in high school. But I remember like joining Facebook, and Instagram was much later on. But I do know that at a place, right, when you're younger and a bit more unaware of who you are as self, scrolling can be dangerous to your mental health if you're not mindful. Because yes, I totally agree with you ladies that at core that this is falsified in some way, but I think your eyes and some part of your brain goes, I'm not good enough, I'm scrolling through and I'm not good enough. So even though that we're intellectual beings that we can say this is falsified, I think there's still a part of us in our brains, especially in this younger generation, that is growing up full of social media, that they go, I'm not good enough, I need to do better, I need to be better. And that becomes a little scary to me. Like, my nieces are growing up now, and I get nervous. I mean, my brother and my sister-in-law are really good. They don't allow them to really have more TV time or screen time than like 30 minutes a day because, they want to try and normalize life to them instead of screen time to them. And I get a little nervous in the back of my head that I don't know what's going to happen in the future if social media really takes over, because I think what it started as was this beautiful thing as a way to communicate with people, right, that may have drifted or, lost connection, whatever it may be. But now it's turned into who's prettiest, who has the cleanest house, all of this stuff. And people aren't communicating. They're just scrolling. That's a little scary to me.
Yeah, there is that like bigger picture aspect of it all, isn't there? That kind of like, where is this all going? Like, we all know like how it kind of started and what the intention was, like you said, like connecting with people you went to high school with or whatever. But now it's kind of turned into something else. And like, what do we make of all that?
Yeah. And like I said, for those new moms, like we just had our episode drop last week with Ayana, who's a midwife. And, we talked about postpartum depression, all of that. And for women that are going through that, social media must be so detrimental to their mental health, I would think, just because they're already in this altered mental state, and to therefore put social media on top of it, it just must be really difficult.
I think the best piece of advice I ever got was from a quote unquote influencer. What I liked about her is that she talked very candidly and openly. I almost made like a joke of people who take it too serious. She said, do yourself a favor. If something is making you feel bad about yourself, unfollow. She said, even if that's me, even if looking at me and my physique and what I have to offer you makes you feel bad about yourself, unfollow me. She said, because you have to start looking at things that boost up your self-esteem, not tear it down. I think if we start to put, as we like to say, put the social back in social media, there will be spaces and platforms that will allow these children to spend more than 30 minutes on the phone, but they're utilizing it for something educational, something informational. So I think we can get there. It's just going to take a little bit of dusting and pruning and prepping.
The overarching theme here, right, is that self-awareness piece, right? Like I think Stephanie was just saying, being mindful of like what is making us feel good, what's not making us feel good on social media, and kind of having the awareness of and being intentional enough to say like, I can't follow this anymore. This is making me feel like garbage. Or, I'm not on social media saying like, oh, I feel so connected with these other people. I'm on social media saying, what's wrong with me? And I think having that awareness and being able to sit with that and say, well, which one is it right now? Do I feel connected, or am I kind of getting down on myself?
We're talking a lot about moms and about mindfulness, so I'm sure this is going to tie into that. But how do you think that women can prepare, partners can prepare for pregnancy, for that next step in your life if you choose to be a mom?
This is like such a tough question, I think, because I kind of go back to it a lot. Like I mentioned, I had like such a rocky start into motherhood. And when I was 35 weeks, my water broke at my baby shower and I had a baby like 3 hours later. I was out of town. I was at a different hospital. It was like this whole crazy situation. And I think that was a big part of like my postpartum depression, my postpartum experience, is that I always felt like I never got to like finish my pregnancy, or this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. So even though I had done like quote unquote all the stuff, right, to get ready, I'm not sure we can. I think we can perform all of these tasks we've been told to do, right? We can read the books, we can buy the stuff, I can get the baby registry, I can do all those things. But motherhood is such a deep and total personal transformation that I think just one of the best things we can do is to acknowledge what a huge transformation it is and what it's going to be, and be hopeful and that we can find our way through it. So often, I think in society, I think we're led to believe that nothing has to change. Like, oh, you'll just have a baby now. That's the only difference. Once the baby comes out, you're not going to look pregnant and you'll just be you, but with a baby. But that's not necessarily like how it works. There's so much emphasis on getting back to you or getting your body back and all of those things. And maybe we just have to trust that we're going to get through the transformation and that we can ask for help and talk about the grief and struggles that come along with it along the way, and just being flexible to what lies ahead. And maybe that's the biggest preparation of all, is not trying to step away from this belief that we know what's going to happen next, because we don't. No matter how much someone tells us, it's something that is going to be so unique to you specifically, and your experience isn't going to necessarily be like anyone else's. And you just have to know that there's people before you that have gone through this and gotten through it, and you're going to be able to do it too. And you just have to kind of, I think, go with it in a lot of ways and be willing and able to ask for help and, receive support.
But like you were just saying, it's going with the flow. You can't stop the water. It's just going to continue on. So like whatever happens, that's just the way it is, and that's okay.
We can only take life as it comes. And I think that goes for any life transformation. We put a lot of time and energy and mental energy into imagining the next part, right? We're always like, what's it going to be like when I go to school? Or what's this going to happen? And what's going to be like when we're married? And what's it going to be like when we have a house and whatever? That we can kind of sit in that kind of future focus so much. But I think if we step back like that, your other guest said, and kind of go with the flow, stay flexible, and know that we can handle whatever comes our way, that we have the resources that we've developed over a lifetime to kind of make it through this, and we'll find our way through it. And we just have to kind of, I don't want to say wait it all out, but it's kind of like wait it all out, that it's going to come, it's going to happen, and we're going to get through it.
And that's such a reassuring thought too, right? Is that constant reminder of, what, if I just take a deep breath and reconnect, I'm going to get through it like I did before, like I've done before. That's something I always tell myself. I'm like, well, you got through that hard thing that was freaking you out, 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I did do that. So it's just, I guess, the reminder that you are capable of more than you think sometimes.
Yes, and like you said, Stephanie, we have all this data to back that up. This is maybe one unique thing, but there's parts of it that are similar to so many other life stages that we've been through. And I think that recognition of your own personal resilience and your personal resources that you have within you to get through these hard things is still there.
So Bryce, I'm really compelled to ask you, I know this wasn't one of the planned questions, but I know what our favorite part of doing this podcast has been, but what is your favorite part about being able to communicate with these women and help them open their eyes, all of that stuff?
So I am not a social media person at all, in my personal life. I think I have 60 friends on my regular Instagram or whatever, and it's not something I'm into at all, but I love the idea of, like I said before, the parts about social media that I do love is this power to connect people through a common experience. Because I think one thing I've learned as a therapist is that humans are so much more alike than they're different. I've worked, like I've said, in so many different settings. I've worked in the juvenile justice setting with, young men, and I've worked worked in the addiction setting, and I've worked in trauma, and I've worked with families and mothers and, chronic and persistent mental illness out in the community. One thing I've learned with working with all of these people over the last, 11 or 12 years is that there's just like a common thread of humanity that runs through us all. And I think it can be so easy to lose sight of that as like our own individual humans, that we can think we're so unique and that no one knows what we go through and no one understands our pain. And while our own experiences and pain and trials are unique to us, they are also a part of the human experience in general. And that has been something I love about social media is like, all the DMs I get there, people are like, how did you know? I'm like, well, I know because it's not like just you, it's also me. And it's also these other humans that are with us here, that there is a common thread amongst us all, and we all work in relatively similar ways. And recognizing there's a lot of power, I think, in recognizing that and helping people feel less alone, both for ourselves and for others. And that, I think, has been kind of my favorite part of being on social media in that particular way, and as like a professional or expert in the parenting motherhood niche. And I really have loved it. I never expected to, but it kind of fired me up, like we talked about earlier in this episode, in a way that my clinical work had kind of waned away from doing. And I've loved that kind of experience of serving in this different way.
So, Bryce, we were just talking about what your favorite part of doing this whole thing is, and communication keeps being brought up. So now I need to know, what does women empowerment mean to you?
That's such a good one too. So I think it all just comes back to like that personal agency, right? That belief and ability that we can make the best choices and decisions for our own unique situations and circumstances, and feel supported and empowered to do that without question. That there is like just no hesitation that we can make good choices for ourselves, and that we have been brought up in a way or, supported in a way that gives us that freedom. And that's, I guess, what it means to me, just that personal agency and, that belief and assurance that we can do it.
So my last question would be, what advice would you give your 15-year-old self?
I think I would tell myself to take more risks, like to be, I don't want to say braver, but I was, like I mentioned a little earlier, I was like a really anxious and cautious kid and a young adult. And I wish I had kind of like stretched my wings a bit more and explored things that I didn't maybe feel like cool enough or brave enough to do at that time. Like I was, I know we've talked a lot about like self-awareness and flexibility over this last, bit of conversation that we've had. And I think I was someone as a young like teenager who thought like I had my path and I had to stay on my path, and like, this is who I am, or this is who I am because this is who everyone thinks I am. Like I was in a small town, that sort of thing. And I think I felt or, allowed myself to be like kind of boxed in by that. And I didn't come out of that maybe till my early 20s. And I wish I had kind of, if I could go back in time, I would say like, take more risks. Like you can just be who you want to be flexible, and go with it. Go after what fires you up, what lights you up, and don't care so much what everybody else thinks.
I was in the room with you there on that. It's so hard. You're just like at that age, and you really, unfortunately, you just really, like I said earlier, kind of get stuck on that conveyor belt, and the comparison game is really strong, and you just think you have to follow one path, but it's so not the case. You can do whatever you want, no matter how anybody looks at you. Just be proud of who you are. Be proud of yourself.
Definitely. And I wonder if that's changing, like as society changes, right? Is our kids, I think I have spent time working with teens and everything, and I wonder if they do feel a little bit more empowered to do that now. You know what I mean? Like as kind of times change and how like society changes, I think kids are a little bit, take more risks with, in terms of like who they are as people and exploring who they are and building that self-awareness from kind of a younger age. So I think it's kind of, lots have changed, I'm sure, since I was 15. So
yes. Oh no, I'm sure. And I'm sure that's like a pro and a con of social media. I'm sure because they're getting all that information, they are empowered, like to like stand up and fight and, talk about what they believe in. But I'm sure that's also a negative, right? Where they're on it and they're like, oh, but she is so much prettier, and oh, I'm being cyberbullied, and all of this stuff is like the negative aspect of what social media can do. But I like to focus on the positives always. I try.
Most of this conversation has just been phenomenal, good stuff. So that actually leads me to my question that I always like to ask all of our guests because you've been so open and honest. The way that you speak is so intelligent and informative, and I want other people to be able to experience this. So where can they find you? And do you have any fun or exciting projects coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram. That's kind of where I spend most of my time. I'm also on, I think, Facebook and Clubhouse and those other places, but I don't really understand how Clubhouse works, and Facebook. I'm not sure I understand Facebook either, but Instagram, I spend a lot of time there, and you can find me at mombrain.therapist. And I hang out a lot over there. I share information on kind of motherhood and everyday mental health, which is kind of just, I think mental health can so often be made to think that it's only something for when something's wrong, like we're depressed or we're anxious, but I like mental health to be a part of everyday life. And so I like to share information about how it is a part of everyday life and motherhood and parenting. And I enjoy doing that. And I have offerings around kind of our temper and motherhood. And I also have an offering, it's called the Calmer Mom Playbook. And there it is a planner for people who would like to kind of jumpstart making their own needs a priority and scheduling them into their lives so that they have something to kind of look forward to and they can reap the benefits that come along with it. So those are my two things that I do over there. And that is that.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us. I know I say it all the time that I do feel that time sometimes is more precious than money. So thank you for taking whatever little bit you may have had and spent it with us.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. I honestly love having these conversations, and it's honestly like a huge honor to even be asked to share my thoughts and my opinions on things and to, connect with you. Like we've talked about all along today, is that connection is so powerful and important to me, especially in this day and age when I feel like we're all so disconnected because of what's going on in the world around us. To be able to have this opportunity to sit in my office and connect with you guys and your listeners and to just talk about, like common humanity, like we talked about a little bit earlier, and connect through that. So I super appreciate you having me.
No, thank you, Bryce. I always love this is the meat and potatoes. It is just, I love talking to every woman that we have brought on. This is insightful and truthful, and it's pulling back the layers of the onion to reveal that we're not alone.
Never alone. Something I get in my DMs all the time is someone saying, I thought I was alone. I thought it was just me. And I feel like, a million times a day, my response is, you're definitely not alone. You're never alone. Those powerful words, even when I say them in person in clinical practice, often bring tears to people's eyes, right? That this idea is that we can feel like such solitary beings and out on our own, and to have someone affirm for you, whether through even just seeing a comment on an Instagram post to recognize that you are not alone is a powerful thing.
Well, thank you so much for syncing up with us. And like we were just saying, we are truly never alone. And we hope that everybody listening syncs up with us next time.